Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're taking a deep dive into the world of Jainism,
Okay.
specifically
Yeah.
the two main sects,
Uh-huh.
Shvetambara and Digambara.
Right.
And whether you're a UPSC aspirant,
Oh, yeah.
gearing up for that GS1 ancient history paper,
Yeah.
or just someone who, loves to learn about different philosophies
Mm-hmm.
and religions, this is going to be a really fascinating dive.
It is.
So, to kind of set the stage here, I think it's interesting to point out that Jainism actually existed for quite some time before we started seeing these
Right.
sects and subsects pop up.
Exactly. Before Mahavira, there was no concept of Shvetambara and Digambara. It's a later development.
So what caused this split?
Right.
Why did these two branches emerge from, what was originally one unified belief system?
Well, it all goes back to a pretty significant historical event. Around 298 BC,
Okay.
there was a severe famine in Magad.
Oh, wow.
Now, this famine led to a major migration.
Makes sense, yeah.
One group, led by Bhadrabahu,
Okay.
and interestingly enough, Chandragupta Maurya,
Oh, wow, okay.
decided to head south to Shravanbelgola.
Okay.
The other group, under the leadership of Stolpadra,
I got it.
stayed back in Magad. So this separation, this geographical distance, coupled with the hardships they were all facing during the famine,
Right.
sort of led to these diverging interpretations and practices of Jainism. And eventually, this solidified into the two sects that we know today.
Got it. So it's like they were physically separated and that kind of
Yeah,
caused
exactly.
the philosophical separation as well?
Uh-huh.
That's really interesting. Okay, so let's start with the Shvetambara,
Okay.
often called the white-clad sect.
Right.
Now, why the white clothes? What's the significance of that?
So Shvetambara literally translates to white-clad.
Okay.
And they're monks and nuns. They wear these simple white garments.
Okay.
Because their belief is that clothing itself is
Okay.
not an obstacle to spiritual liberation. They're more focused on this idea of internal renunciation. So detaching from possessions, detaching from desires,
Yeah.
rather than focusing on external appearances.
So it's more about the internal state
Exactly.
rather than what you're wearing on the outside.
Exactly.
Okay, got it. Now, what about women in the Shvetambara order? Can they, become nuns?
This is a very important distinction between the Shvetambara and the Digambara. The Shvetambara are much more inclusive in this regard.
Okay.
They allow women into the monastic order,
Okay.
and they believe that women are just as capable of achieving nirvana or liberation as men are.
So they see that path to enlightenment as being open to both men and women equally.
Precisely.
Okay, that's interesting. Now, when it comes to their beliefs, what texts do the Shvetambara consider to be, their holy scriptures?
They follow a collection of texts known as the Agamas.
Okay.
These include the Angas, which are considered the most important.
And the Angabahas, which are sort of supplementary texts. And they believe these contain the core teachings and doctrines of Mahavira.
So those are kind of their core texts, the foundation of their beliefs. Now, within the Shvetambara sect, I understand that there are even further divisions like subsects.
You are absolutely correct.
Can you tell me a little bit about those?
Yes. There are three main subsects within the Shvetambara.
Okay.
The Sanakavasi,
Okay.
the Murtapujaka, and the Terapanthi.
Okay.
And they each have their own sort of unique practices.
All right. So let's start with the Sanakavasi.
Okay.
What makes them unique?
So the Stanakavasi are very interesting.
Okay.
They've moved away from the traditional idol worship.
Okay.
Instead of praying to idols in temples, they focus on venerating saints.
Interesting. So their devotion is directed towards these like enlightened beings.
Yes.
But not in like a physical representation.
Precisely.
And they also have this practice of wearing a muhapati.
What's muhapati?
It's basically a cloth that they cover their mouth with.
Okay.
And it symbolizes their commitment to nonviolence, even in speech.
So it's like a physical reminder to be mindful of the words that they're speaking.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Wow, that's really interesting. Okay, what about the Murtapujaka? What are they all about?
So the Murtapujaka, also known as Dheravasi,
Okay.
are a little bit more traditional in their approach.
Okay.
They maintain temples, they have idols of Tirthankaras, and they don't use the Muhapati.
Got it. So they're more in line with what we might think of as like standard or traditional Jain worship practices.
Yeah.
And then we have the Terapanthi. What's their deal?
The Tirupanthi's share some similarities with the
Okay.
Stanakavasi.
Okay.
They revere saints and use the Muhapati,
Okay.
but they have their own distinct
Mm.
lineage and
Yeah.
practices as well.
So it's like they're kind of a blend of those two in some ways. In a way, yes.
That's really fascinating. Okay, so before we move on to the Digambara,
Yeah.
is there anything else that's really important to remember about the Shikambara?
One crucial point, especially for UPSC aspirants,
Okay, yeah.
is that the Shvetambara firmly believe that their scriptures,
Okay.
the agamas that we talk about,
Uh-huh.
hold the original teachings of Mahavira.
Okay.
And this is going to be a point of contention
Oh.
with the Digambara, as we'll see.
Got it. So we'll keep that in mind. Okay, let's move on to the Digambara then.
Okay.
Now, they're also known as the sky-clad ascetics.
Right.
That's a pretty striking image.
It is.
What's the reasoning behind that?
So the Digambara, their name itself, Digambara, means sky-clad.
Okay.
And they believe that to truly achieve liberation,
Okay.
spiritual seekers should completely renounce
Oh,
all possessions, and that includes clothing.
okay, wow.
They see this as the ultimate form of detachment.
So they're really taking that idea of detachment
To the extreme.
to the extreme. Wow. Okay. Now, wouldn't that make it difficult or even impossible for women to
Yes.
join the Digambara order?
And that's another key difference. The Digambara believe that women, because they require clothing,
Okay.
cannot attain liberation in their current lifetime.
Okay.
They would have to be reborn as men
Okay.
to achieve that ultimate spiritual goal.
Wow. So that's a pretty big contrast
Pretty different.
with the Shvetambara's views on women's spiritual potential.
Exactly.
Okay, that's a really important distinction to note.
Mhm.
Now, when it comes to the Digambara, what about scriptures? Do they follow the same texts as the Shvetambara?
Here's another point of divergence.
Okay.
The Digambara actually believe that the original Jain scriptures,
Okay.
the ones that the Shvetambara hold as sacred, were lost over time.
Okay.
So they rely on later texts,
Yeah.
oral traditions, and commentaries.
So their understanding of like the core principles of Jainism comes from these like more recent sources and interpretations.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's a big difference. Now, do the Digambara also have subsects
Yes, they do.
like the Shvetambara?
They actually have quite a few subsects.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Some of the prominent ones include Mulasang, Bisapantha,
Okay.
Terapantha, Taranapantha, Gumanapantha, and Todapantha.
Wow, there's a lot there.
There are many, and each one has its own nuances in
Right.
terms of rituals and interpretations.
So it's kind of like a whole other layer of complexity within the Digambara branch.
Yes, definitely.
Okay, so we've got all these different groups. Just to kind of give our listeners a sense of that diversity,
Sure.
can we maybe focus on two specific Digambara subsects?
Absolutely.
Maybe like the Mulasang and the Bisapantha.
Those are good choices.
What makes those two stand out?
Well, the Mulasang is considered the oldest
Okay.
known Digambara subsect.
Okay.
It dates back to 430 AD.
Wow, so it's got a long history.
It does.
And they're closely associated with the teachings of Acharya Kundakunda,
Okay.
who is a very revered Jain philosopher.
Okay.
The Bisapantha, on the other hand,
Well,
incorporate elements that might seem
okay.
a little surprising
Okay.
given the Digambara emphasis on renunciation.
Oh, really? What do you mean?
Well, they engage in rituals like arti,
Oh, okay.
offering flowers, fruits, prasad to the Tirthankaras, yakshas, and yakshinis.
Okay, so they're incorporating some more devotional practices into
Exactly.
their, otherwise very ascetic lifestyle.
And they also recognize individuals known as pacharakas as dharma gurus,
Okay,
which is a concept that's not universally accepted
got it.
within the Digambara tradition.
So they've got their own unique take on leadership and spiritual authority.
Precisely.
Wow. Okay, I think we've built a really good foundation here
Yes.
for understanding the Shvetambara and Digambara.
Look, we've covered a lot of ground.
But let's really drill down into those differences.
Yeah. Maybe create a little mental checklist for our listeners, especially for those UPSC hopefuls who, need to know these details for their exams.
Let's do that.
So what are those key distinctions? Let's break it down.
Okay, great. Starting with leadership, the Shvetambara trace their lineage
Okay.
back to Stulpadra, while the Digambara follow Padrabahu.
Got it.
Then, of course, there's the most obvious difference,
Yeah.
the clothing. Shvetambara monks wear those simple white garments,
Right.
while the Digambara monks practice complete nudity.
That's the big one. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, of course, their views on women's salvation.
Right.
The Shvetambara believe women can attain nirvana.
Yes.
The Digambara believe it's impossible in a female form.
Huge difference.
Yeah.
Important for UPSC, definitely.
Good one, yeah. So those are some pretty fundamental differences.
Absolutely.
What about the teachings they follow?
Yeah.
Are there differences there?
Yes. The Shvetambara adhere to the 4 restraints outlined by Parshvanatha, while the Digambara follow the 5 Mahavratas.
Got it.
Prescribed by Mahavira.
Okay, so they have slightly different, like, core practices.
Yes.
Even though they both fall under this umbrella of Jainism.
Exactly.
Okay. And what about their sacred literature? What texts do each sect consider
That's important too.
to be, authoritative?
So the Shvetambara considered those Angas and other agamas, the ones we talked about, as their authoritative texts.
Okay.
They believe those are the original teachings of Mahavira.
Right.
The Digambara, however, as we mentioned, believe those original texts were lost.
Okay.
So they rely on later works, like the Prakrit Sutta Pahuta of Kunda Kunda.
Okay, so very different lineages.
Yeah.
Very different texts.
Yes.
Very different interpretations.
Okay.
Anything else
There are a few more.
that really sets them apart?
One interesting difference is in the way they depict their Tirthankara idols.
Oh, okay.
The Digambara depict them as nude,
Okay.
unadorned, and with downcast eyes, really emphasizing their contemplative state.
Got it.
The Alentambara, however, adorn their idols with jewels.
Okay.
They even insert glass eyes, giving them a more lifelike appearance.
So they have a very different approach
Very
to, like, the visuals and the aesthetics of how they represent these enlightened beings.
Yes.
Wow, that's fascinating. Anything else?
There's also a difference of opinion regarding food for omniscient beings.
Okay, tell me about that.
So the Digambara believe that once a saint achieves Kivali or omniscience, they no longer need to eat.
Okay.
The Shvetambara disagree.
Really?
Yes.
So they have different understandings of even
how enlightenment manifests.
Enlightenment looks like.
Exactly.
And how it affects your physical needs.
Exactly.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
So I think we've really thoroughly
Yes, I think so.
explored the Shvetambara and Digambara here.
We've touched on the major points.
And especially for those UPSC folks out there.
Yes.
This is like goals, right? These are the key differences that they need to know. But, stepping back for a second and thinking about someone who's maybe brand new to Jainism.
Right.
Why should they care about these different interpretations? What's the takeaway for them?
That's a fantastic question. And I think the biggest takeaway is that even within a single faith, there can be a huge spectrum of beliefs and practices.
Yeah.
The Shvetambara and Digambara really demonstrate that a religion can evolve, it can adapt over time. It's influenced by history, by social contexts, and by individual interpretations.
So it's not like this monolithic thing.
Not at all.
It's constantly changing and evolving.
Exactly. It's dynamic.
That's really interesting.
And by exploring these different perspectives, I think we gain a much deeper appreciation for just the richness and the complexity of human spiritual expression.
Absolutely. It's like opening a door to this whole world of different ways of thinking. About, the big questions, the meaning of life, the path to enlightenment. So fascinating.
It is.
Okay, so I think we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
In this first part of our deep dive into Jainism. We've talked about the Shvetambara. We've talked about the Digambara. We've looked at their origins. Their different views on key issues, their practices, their subsects. It's amazing how much diversity exists within this single faith.
It is. And I think it raises a really interesting question.
Okay, what's that?
How do these diverse interpretations within Jainism reflect the broader philosophical landscape of ancient India? How do they contribute to our understanding of things like asceticism, gender roles, and even the path to enlightenment itself? So these are really thought-provoking questions for everyone to ponder as they continue their own deep dive into this fascinating tradition.
Absolutely. And I think this is really just the beginning of your exploration, right? There's so much more to discover.
So much more.
In the world of Jain philosophy. From their intricate cosmology to their ethical principles. And how those principles can be applied to our lives today.
It's a rich tradition.
So much to explore. So keep that curiosity alive. Keep exploring.
Exactly.
Seeking those aha moments.
And we'll see you next time.
And we'll be back with part 2 of this deep dive soon. So until then, happy learning.
Happy learning. So we were talking about some more of the differences.
Yeah, like what else?
Between the Shvetambara and the Digambara.
Yeah.
And another really fascinating one is this idea of food for omniscient beings.
Okay.
So the Digambara believes that once a saint achieves that state of Kevali, which is omniscience, they no longer need to eat.
Okay.
The Shvetambara disagree.
Wow. So they have a different understanding of...
A fundamental difference.
What enlightenment even means.
On a very practical level.
Right, like how it affects your physical body.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Wow, that's so interesting.
It's fascinating how these nuances appear in their beliefs.
Yeah. Okay, so we've really gone deep.
I think so.
Into the Shvetambara and Digambara.
We've covered a lot of ground.
And for those UPSC aspirants out there, you know,
this is it.
This is what you need to know.
This is the stuff.
These are the key distinctions.
The must-knows.
But I want to take a step back for a second.
Sure.
And think about someone who's maybe, like, never even heard of Jainism before.
Okay.
Why should they care about these different interpretations?
I love that question.
What's the takeaway for them?
I think one of the biggest takeaways is that even within a single faith, you could have this massive spectrum of beliefs and practices. So it's not just like one size fits all.
None at all.
When it comes to religion.
Jainism really showcases that the Shvetambara and Digambara show us how a religion can evolve, how it adapts over time.
Right.
It's influenced by historical events, by social contexts, and by individual interpretations.
So it's like this living, breathing thing.
Exactly. It's dynamic.
That's not static. It's constantly changing.
It's constantly evolving.
That's fascinating.
It is. And I think by exploring these different perspectives, it gives us a much deeper appreciation for just how rich and complex human spiritual expression can be.
It's like it opens the door to a whole other way.
It does.
Of thinking about, you know, these big questions.
The big questions.
About life and existence.
Exactly, the meaning of life.
And the path to enlightenment.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have in this deep dive.
We talked about the origins.
Yeah.
The beliefs. The practices. These subsects.
All the key elements.
Of both the Shvetambara and the Digambara.
Yeah.
It's amazing how much diversity.
It's remarkable how
exists within this single faith.
It really is. And this exploration leads us to a really interesting question.
Okay, what is it?
How do these diverse interpretations within Jainism reflect the broader philosophical landscape of ancient India? How do they contribute to our understanding of things like asceticism, gender roles, and even the path to enlightenment itself? These are big questions for all of us to ponder as we continue to explore this fascinating tradition.
Absolutely. And I think this is really just the beginning.
It's just the tip of the iceberg.
Of the exploration.
Right.
So much more to discover.
There's their intricate cosmology, their ethical principles, how those principles apply to our lives today.
A wealth of knowledge.
So keep that curiosity alive. Keep exploring. Keep digging.
Keep seeking those aha moments.
Exactly.
And we'll be back with part 3 of this deep dive soon.
Can't wait.
Until then, happy learning.
Happy learning.
It really is fascinating to see how these ancient traditions are still relevant today.
Absolutely.
You know, and how they can teach us so much.
So much.
About ourselves and about, you know,
the human condition.
The world around us.
Exactly.
So to wrap things up, we've taken this deep dive into the world of Jainism.
We've explored
the 2 main sects.
The Shvetambara and the Digambara.
The Shvetambara and the Digambara.
With all their nuances.
All their fascinating differences.
The complexities.
And we've seen how these differences really reflect the broader philosophical landscape of ancient India.
Absolutely.
So whether you're a UPSC aspirant, gearing up for those exams.
Good luck to all of them.
Or just someone who's curious. About different religions and philosophies. I hope this deep dive has given you a new appreciation.
A deeper understanding.
For the richness and the complexity.
It's fascinating.
Of Jainism.
It is.
So keep exploring.
Keep learning.
Keep asking questions.
And keep those aha moments coming.
And until next time.
Happy learning, everyone.
Happy learning.